Will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled Putting Food on the Table, a Review of the Importance of Agriculture Research. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine federal agriculture research, including the scope, importance, value, and impact of such research. Agriculture research is a broad term that can include the study of diseases that threaten the nation's animal agriculture industry and public health. It can also refer to increase and improve crop and yield production through advancements in science and technology. In other words, we rely on the research to help protect the nation from disasters, and we rely on it to help prepare us for the future, one in which agriculture research will benefit from developments in precision and automated technologies such as robotics and artificial intelligence. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, agriculture research is an important topic for my constituents and for me because agriculture is such a critical industry. According to the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, agriculture is Virginia's largest industry by far, with nothing else coming a close second. People are actually surprised that Virginia, for those of us in Northern Virginia, we might be a little surprised that agriculture still holds as the top industry. The industry has an economic impact of $70 billion annually and provides more than 334,000 jobs in the Commonwealth. In the 10th Congressional District, agriculture's key role is felt far and wide, from the rows upon rows of apple and peach orchards in the western counties to the ever-growing wine industry, craft breweries, and distilleries. We also have dairy and cattle farms, too. Our distinguished panel today represents a variety of perspectives to explain the value and impact of agriculture research. We will hear about the food security and economic and national security implications of a natural disaster or a terrorist attack on our crops and livestock. We will also hear about industry research efforts and practices and an academic perspective on innovative efforts to more efficiently increase and improve crop yields. These are important considerations because agriculture research impacts all of us. As an example, one need only go back to the avian flu outbreak, which I'm not sure if I might be having a flu outbreak here, of 2014 and 15, which resulted in almost $900 million in expenses to federal and state governments, the slaughter of more than 50 million birds, and an estimated cost to the U.S. economy in excess of $3 billion. I look forward to hearing about federal and other stakeholder agriculture research efforts from our witnesses today. I hope to understand how the research is coordinated and complemented to protect America's food sources so that we may all continue to safely and abundantly put food on our tables for the foreseeable future. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, for holding this hearing and the witnesses for being here today. Certainly in my state of Illinois, agriculture is huge, so there's no question that people know that. Often, the major research issues that we talk about here on the Research and Technology Subcommittee are not the subjects of everyday dinner conversation. But today, we're actually talking about dinner. As I was hoping to see some product here for us this morning, but that's all right. Putting safe and affordable food on the table is something many of us take for granted. However, there's an entire ecosystem of innovation and public-private partnerships that make it possible for farmers to continue to meet the needs of a growing population. Agricultural science is multidisciplinary, spanning fields from engineering to economics. As Dr. Moose from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign can attest, UIUC's Crop Sciences Department includes research in statistics, ecology, environmental sciences, plant biology, horticulture, plant genetics, plant pathology, and weed science. Likewise, major discoveries and innovations that assist in crop production come from unexpected places. For example, new genetic editing technologies that began in microbiology research lab promise major leaps forward for agriculture. In another example, NASA supported the development of satellite image refinement software for its research that also helps agricultural researchers study the effects of population and climate on crop field acreage. Agricultural researchers work closely with farmers to help translate all of the science into practice, while farmers continue to help define the research agenda for food security. Research and development is a system of feedback loops, not a linear path. There's rarely a clean line between basic and applied research in any field of inquiry, and today's topic is no exception. It's important to remember this as we examine the need for flexible, sustainable federal support for agricultural research. Both government and private sector investments support agricultural research. Multiple federal agencies support efforts to advance our nation's leadership in agricultural research. These agencies work in close collaboration with the agricultural industry. Unfortunately, as federal budgets are tightened, academic researchers have less funding to move their science through the development process. Therefore, the private sector supports an increasing share of agricultural research. While the private sector has an important role, we must continue to provide a balance of both public and private funding in order to ensure both a pipeline of basic research and a research agenda driven by the needs of farmers and the public. Our lack of dedication to sustainable funding could cost us global competitiveness in certain areas of agricultural technology and put our food security at risk within the lifetime of many of us. A number of factors can affect the quality, availability, and safety of the plants and animals that help feed our families, including extreme weather, pests, and disease. In the face of emerging infectious diseases and new technological tools such as genetic editing, we must also be vigilant about intentional contamination and disruption of our food supply. I hope there's some discussion today about how researchers and industry are taking into consideration the agricultural impacts of a changing climate and growing population, and how those factors will help us shape the research agenda. On the biosecurity front, which is one focus of this hearing, several of today's witnesses will testify about the critical need to implement sustainable funding policies for the new National Bio and Agro Defense Facility under construction in Manhattan, Kansas. Now is the time to consider a federal strategy to increase the scale of agricultural research across the relevant agencies, encourage balanced federal-private sector partnerships, and ensure that our future agricultural workforce is equipped with the necessary science and technology skills to meet the food and biosecurity challenges of today and tomorrow. Finally, I'd like to note that agricultural research also has applications beyond food security. For example, the Department of Energy recently awarded UIUC 5 years of funding to establish one of 4 new bioenergy research centers that will provide a new generation of sustainable bioenergy and other bio-based products. I thank all the witnesses for being here today to share their expertise, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. And given my challenges with my cold and my voice today, I'm going to defer to Mr. Marshall to be able to introduce our witnesses, which also include someone from his district. So thank you, Mr. Marshall, for taking over those duties.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. And let me just start by saying thank you to the SST staff who's done a fabulous job of organizing this. I had no idea how much work it might be, and you all have been a thrill and an honor to work with you, and to my staff as well. Lauren Orndorff is my science space technology staff person, has done a great job organizing the witnesses, and so honored to be able to introduce you all. First is Dr. Daniel Gerstein, who's the Senior Policy Director at the RAND Corporation. He's also the Adjunct Professor at American University in Washington, D.C. Previously, Dr. Gerstein served in the Department of Homeland Security as Acting Undersecretary and Deputy Undersecretary in the Science and Technology Directorate. He graduated from the United States Military Academy and has a master's degree from Georgia Tech, the National Defense University, and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He also earned a PhD in biodefense from George Mason University. Thanks, Dr. Gerstein, for coming. And my next witness is our own Dr. Stephen Higgs, who's the Associate Vice President for Research and Director of the Biosecurity Research Institute at my alma mater, Kansas State University, and we're both got our purple ties on. Go Cats. This institution's unique biocontainment research and education facility. Dr. Higgs is responsible for oversight, coordination, and expansion of the Institute's biosecurity research and education programs. The Institute is located next to the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, which we call NBAF back home, a biosafety level 4 facility which is currently under construction, and when completed will make Manhattan, Kansas the Silicon Valley of bioagro defense. As it becomes operational, Dr. Higgs' proximity and experience will be invaluable to bringing that operation online. Previously, Dr. Higgs served as the president of the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, as well as editor-in-chief of vector-borne and zoonotic diseases. Dr. Higgs earned a Bachelor of Science with honors in zoology from the King's College in London and his PhD in parasitology from Reading University in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Dr. Higgs, to Washington, D.C., and we look forward to your testimony. So much appreciate the tour you gave us back home as well. Next witness is Dr. Stephen P. Moose. He's Denton and Elizabeth Alexander Professor of Maize Breeding and Genetics in the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research focuses on understanding how gene regulatory programs may be modified for crop improvement. Dr. Moose spent 2 years as a project leader at DeKalb Genetics Corporation and Monsanto Company using biotechnology to enhance corn grain nutritional quality. Dr. Moose received a Bachelor's of Science degree in biology from Case Western Reserve University and a PhD in genetics and crop science from North Carolina State University. And finally, Dr. Elizabeth Wagstrom, get it right, Wagstrom, is our final witness, Chief Veterinarian of the National Pork Producers Council. During her career, Dr. Wagstrom has worked at the intersection of animal health and public health, including as a practicing veterinarian, an epidemiologist and public health veterinarian, an industry organization staff member, and in academia. Dr. Wagstrom holds a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and Master's of Preventive Medicine degrees from Iowa State University. And we start with our testimony by recognizing Dr. Gerstein for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Well, thank you very much. Very pleased to be here. Good morning, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today on federal research and development for agricultural biodefense. Since the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in 2003, the department, in complete coordination with the Department of Agriculture, has served an essential role in agricultural biodefense, particularly in research and development. During my service as acting undersecretary and deputy undersecretary of the Science and Technology Directorate, my duties included oversight and support for U.S. agricultural biodefense, R&D, including the work at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, or short Plum Island, several academic centers of excellence related to agricultural biodefense, and tens of millions of dollars annually in research and development funding. It is also during this period when DHS, led by the S&T Directorate, developed the justification and secured funding for the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, NBAF, at Manhattan, Kansas, as the replacement for the Plum Island facility. My testimony today will largely draw on these experiences. In my remarks, I'd like to place federal R&D efforts for agricultural biodefense in context. To do this, I will develop several themes. First, federal agricultural research must be considered within the global biological threats that span a broad spectrum, from emerging infectious disease to the deliberate use of biological pathogens. Second, agricultural security is a national security and economic security issue. Third, U.S. laws, policies, and regulations are part of a larger international system of disease monitoring and reporting. And finally, robust, well-coordinated biodefense R&D is an essential component of maintaining a healthy and vibrant agricultural sector. In the interest of time in my oral remarks, I'll focus on the fourth theme regarding federal agricultural biodefense R&D, specifically developing several important areas of emphasis that should be considered. The first is research and development solutions must be systems-oriented. Investments have to be balanced, and there are no silver bullets. A comprehensive system must include threat awareness, prevention and protection, surveillance and detection, and response and recovery. Second, good disease monitoring will be important to continuity of business. Early detection, rapid response and recovery, and ensuring accurate communications across all interested governmental and non-governmental entities is essential. These areas require appropriate R&D support and funding. Third, cross-sector collaboration, including end-user participation, will be vital for developing preparedness and response capabilities. Livestock industry and producers, government officials, including state and local animal health officials, the biopharmaceutical industry and veterinarians, first responders, and diagnostic laboratories must all collaborate on research and development to identify solutions that will be essential. Fourth, opportunities to field test technologies worldwide should be identified. Countries with endemic zoonotic diseases of interest to the United States government and agricultural sector should be identified and approached to ascertain their willingness to work as partners for countermeasure and vaccine trials. Fifth, next-generation zoonotic disease training should continue to be developed. Education programs that target gaps in the agricultural biodefense workforce to include in research and development would be extremely useful. And finally, consistent funding for agricultural biodefense efforts is essential. Achieving the level of protection for this area will require specific investments in research and development in facilities such as Plum Island and NBAF. It also implies that state and local communities have the necessary funding to operate and maintain the labs that are part of the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. To do otherwise creates unnecessary risks for a $1 trillion portion of the U.S. economy. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss federal R&D for the agricultural biodefense sector, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll now recognize Dr. Higgs.
Good morning, Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Stephen Higgs, and I'm the director of the Biosecurity Research Institute, the BRI, at Pat Roberts Hall, Kansas State University. It's a privilege to be here today. The BRI's mission is leading through research and education to protect agriculture and the public from biological threats. Over 20 different pathogens have been studied at the BRI, but recent studies have focused on agents listed as priorities for the National Bio and Agri Facility, NBAF. The state of Kansas committed $35 million, the NBAF Transition Fund, to support activities aligned with the NBAF mission. Additional funds have been provided by federal agencies, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of Homeland Security, and from stakeholder industries, notably the National Pork Board. For the first time since the 1980s, we have conducted livestock studies with the zoonotic Rift Valley fever virus in the United States. As I speak today, we are assessing susceptibility of white-tailed deer to Rift Valley fever virus. This is an important collaboration between Kansas State University and the USDA's Arthropod-Borne Animal Diseases Research Unit. Using currently circulating Japanese encephalitis virus, another vector-borne zoonotic pathogen, we have infected North American mosquitoes and domestic swine. The BRI is the first non-federal U.S. facility ever to be approved to work on African swine fever and classical swine fever viruses. To perform NBAF-related agricultural research since 2011, over 250 people have been trained and passed the background checks required for registration to work with so-called select agents that are NBAF priorities. Fellowships to train transboundary animal disease professionals have been supported by funds from the Department of Homeland Security, although we have unfortunately heard that they lack the funds to support this important NBAF-related training beyond 2018. I did, however, meet the Deputy Administration of USDA's Office of National Programs to discuss collaborative efforts between the university and USDA for NBAF workforce development. As a first operational land-grant university, K-State has 150 years of committed agricultural research, some of which is described in my written testimony. As I comment more on NBAF, I am not representing the views of DHS or USDA. NBAF is not just a replacement for the aging Plum Island. NBAF will provide a critical new capacity to enhance the nation's ability to understand and respond to the world's most dangerous pathogens. NBAF will enable research with livestock infected with agents requiring biosafety level 4 containment. It's remarkable to me that other countries have federally funded laboratories to do such work, but the US does not. As in other countries, we must have a long-term federal funding commitment to support not just the operation of NBAF, but also the vitally important research and training that will be performed there. In 2015, the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Study Panel on Biodefense published its National Blueprint for Biodefense. Sadly, the most important conclusions were that the U.S. lacked leadership, a strategic plan, and dedicated budget for biodefense. Last January, 2 panel members held a hearing at K-State entitled Agro-Defense Challenges and Solutions. Congressman Roger Marshall provided a congressional perspective. Interestingly, in the subsequent report, it was recommended that DHS and USDA should develop a business plan for MBAS. Whilst in Manhattan, members met leaders of the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center. With expertise on diseases of plants, animals, and people, members of that biothreat team helped to evaluate many reports related to biological threats to U.S. citizens and agriculture. 18 years ago, President Weefol of K-State testified with this before the U.S. Senate's Emerging Threats Subcommittee to discuss biological weapons, the threats to our agricultural economy and food supply. With little tangible action since then, we face the prospect of managing under crisis conditions a biological event that is spreading out of control from state to state. These threats go far beyond disrupting our ability of putting food on the table. They have serious consequences on employment, trade, and global economy. And on that note, I thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Good morning, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss with you putting food on the table. I come to you today with a very personal commitment to this topic. My wife and I both grew up on farms. We were brought together by a state-sponsored fellowship for graduate school at North Carolina State University. We farmers became scientists. We have since devoted our lives through both education and research to bringing science back to the farm. I will discuss with you 3 topics today: the government support of agricultural research, the partnerships among farmers and scientists and the private sector, and then the value of agricultural research. Although I'm using examples from my own personal experience, I'm here to represent the broad enterprise that is agricultural research. So looking at the support, Abraham Lincoln sprouted agricultural research in this country through the creation of the People's Department, the United States Department of Agriculture. He also created, through the Morrill Act, the land-grant universities. From their beginnings, land-grant universities have shared with the federal government, and they're the core of this shared responsibility of agricultural research. The largest piece of the federal research pie supports university research through competitive grants, and these come primarily through the USDA, but also the National Science Foundation, and as Mr. Lipinski mentioned, the Department of Energy. Federal funding supports a healthy diversity of small, exploratory research to large multi-institutional centers. Furthermore, agricultural research is filled with many interagency partnerships. States and local communities also partner extensively on technology transfer and business development through agricultural innovation districts, such as the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, where universities are often the nucleus for job growth. Lincoln's vision also considered fundamentally linked research and education. This year, the University of Illinois celebrates 150 years of teaching farmers to become scientists and scientists to study the farm. We train the next generation of science leaders and the workforce. So let's talk about partnerships. There's a long history of cooperation with agricultural research. I show in the picture, behind here, it's actually the longest running plant genetics experiment in the world, which I actually continue, me and my team. This experiment began in 1896 when a professor went to a local farmer's field, sampled ears of corn, and then decided to select for higher or lower grain protein. And the goal for this was to improve nutrition for animal feed. He did not know that this experiment would continue annually for the next 120 years. And so shown in the picture are my graduate students who completed the 120th cycle of this experiment. In addition to the valuable knowledge we've gained about plant breeding, the earliest commercial corn hybrids, the parents came from this germplasm. Also, high oil corn, which is a value-added trait that's been marketed since the 1990s, came from this experiment. So you just really don't know when this research will pay off. During the last 15 years, the National Science Foundation, the Plant Genome Research Program, the USDA, as well as DuPont Pioneer and Monsanto Company have supported this experiment. So let's talk about the value then of these investments. Agricultural research generates tremendous long-term benefits to the U.S. economy. I show in the next slide there where just the example of average corn yields in the United States. This tremendous increase has been powered by the compounding benefits of advances in science that I list there, with genome editing and big data now being the emerging fields, if you will. And so these will drive further enhancements in yield, nutritional quality, and environmental resiliency. Each bushel of corn yields $300 million at the farm gate and $1 billion to the U.S. consumer. Interestingly, for each of the technologies I list there was a lag period of at least a decade or more from the time of the initial discovery to the commercial application. And so one significant value of agricultural research is to reduce the risks for commercial adoption. Finally, the last thing I will say is that there's an essential value to agricultural research that helps connect science with society. It connects farmers with science and farmers to society, a three-way loop. So only 2% of our population is now engaged in agriculture. The other 98% actually are interested in food, and through research, they're interested in research. So that value is immense. So working together, future agricultural research will continue to put farm and food on the table. Thank you.
I recognize Dr. Wagstrom.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Liz Wagstrom, the Chief Veterinarian of the National Pork Producers Council. The United States is the lowest cost and most technologically innovative producer of food in the world. It is the globe's top exporter of agricultural products and has the safest food on the planet. And it's that way because of our historical commitment to research. To maintain our position in the world and keep our country food secure, we must devote more resources to agricultural research. We need a commitment to research to help America's farmers and ranchers continue to feed this country and much of the rest of the world. The UN's Food and Agricultural Organization says food production needs to increase by 70% by 2050. That need will be met through research into more effective food production. If we don't produce more food for our growing population, are we going to start importing more and more of it to the United States? Are we really going to be okay with relying on some other country to provide for us? Yes, food is a national security issue. The benefits of research should be obvious. In case it's not, according to the USDA's Economic Research Service, for every $1 of federal agricultural research funds invested, $20 is returned to the economy. Through better genetics, better feed rations, and new animal care and housing methods, all based on research, hog farmers now produce more pigs on 78% less land, using 41% less water than 50 years ago. That's why the U.S. pork industry has been a strong supporter, funder, and user of agricultural research. The National Pork Board, as the federally established checkoff program, has spent a significant amount of its annual budget on research over the past 10 years, funding 851 projects at more than $61 million. One disease the pork industry has invested research in dollars on is porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. PRRS is a viral disease that can cause reproductive failure in breeding sows and respiratory issues in pigs of any age. It is the most economically significant disease now affecting U.S. pork production. Through an almost 30-year-long public-private collaboration, starting with the identification of the causative agent of what we called mystery pig disease, we have made significant progress in dealing with this disease. One of those efforts, a PRRS Host Genetics Consortium, brought together the pork industry, USDA's Agricultural Research Service, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Genome Canada, private companies, and universities to conduct multi-year studies to understand the genetics of PRRS virus infection. That has led us to the brink of developing a PRRS-resistant pig. This would be a huge step forward. The recent outbreak of porcine epidemic diarrhea virus points to the vulnerability of U.S. agriculture to emerging and foreign animal diseases. And one of the diseases we and others in livestock agriculture are particularly worried about is foot and mouth disease. An outbreak today of that disease would cost pork, corn, beef, and soybean sectors alone $200 billion over 10 years. We are urging Congress to establish and fund through the next Farm Bill a robust manufacturer-managed vaccine bank to respond to an FMD outbreak. Research can help address the alarming gap in the government's preparedness for an FMD outbreak, so in addition, we are requesting $30 million a year for the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, which conducts diagnostics, as well as $70 million a year for block grants to the states. As you can tell, animal agriculture could use a lot more research dollars. Unfortunately, the commitment to agriculture research seems to have waned. According to USDA, public sector food and agriculture research and development was 50% of the agency's budget from 1970 through 2008, but by 2013 it had fallen to less than 30%. One factor contributing to the decline is the increased operating costs of federal research facilities. It's estimated that the annual maintenance and operating costs of such a facility are 10% of the cost of building it. So over and above research dollars, there must be a commitment to operating funds for federal agriculture research facilities such as NBAF, which is scheduled to open in 2022. These infrastructure needs are a critical issue. As an example, because of maintenance issues, the Plum Island Animal Disease Center cannot, at this time, conduct food animal research on site, and that's a full 5 years ahead of the expected opening of NBAF. There must be a renewed commitment to funding research which will allow America's farmers to effectively feed a growing world population, improve public health, and strengthen national security. In conclusion, the U.S. pork industry strongly supports and urges a significant increase in funding for federal intramural and extramural agricultural research to help America's farmers and ranchers continue feeding a growing world with safe, wholesome, and nutritious food.
Thank you. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Dr. Wagstrom and Dr. Gerstein, you both note in your testimonies that increased travel and trade between nations, combined with the convenience of global travel, would potentially make it easier today for a foreign animal disease to spread quickly once introduced in the U.S. And we've certainly seen that in the past. But why have we really had limited instances of that happening, and what are the best practices for us going forward?
Thank you. One of the best practices going forward is continuing to look at our customs and border protection. We on the farm have responsibilities for biosecurity and to make sure that we are careful about what we bring into our farms. We are definitely in the pork industry concerned. We have not seen foot and mouth disease since 1929. But since 2013, we've had an incursion of porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. In 2009, we had H1N1 influenza that spread through the pandemic globally, and we are now dealing with an outbreak of what's called Seneca Valley virus. And so all three of those have told us, or proven we have vulnerabilities that we need to address. I'll yield to Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Dr. Engstrom talked about. I think it begins with customs and border protection, being able to seal our borders. When agricultural products come through, they need to be properly inspected. There are protocols for that. We do, on a routine basis, find animals that should not come into the country, and of course, they're turned away. But there's more that needs to be done, and here's where research and development can really be key. We need to think about concepts such as pen-side diagnostics and having those available so that we can do a rapid testing of the livestock and ensure that if there is an issue, it's rapidly addressed. To the extent possible, we want to identify as early as we can so that we can take actions and then return the food supply to its proper state. So I think that's one example. We also...
Now, are those being used now?
Well, there are some pen-side diagnostics that have been looked at in terms of research and development. I'll leave it to the experts in terms of how much they are using them within the different industries. But we had been, when I was with Homeland Security, we had been looking at pen-side diagnostics as something very key. I think the recent responses to diseases such as Ebola and Zika point out that we have a lot of work to do, research and development, in areas such as threat awareness. I remember going to a session with the former head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention about a month after the Zika virus had come into the country, and he made the comment that, before this we had about 1/8 of an inch thick file on Zika, and today it's 5 inches thick. Well, I mean, we can't wait until something occurs and then react. And this means that we have to work globally with partners. We have to understand how disease is progressing. We have to make sure that all of our systems, biosurveillance, are tuned so that when something occurs, it can be an immediate response and not wait and be reactive. Those are just a couple thoughts.
Thank you. And Dr. Higgs or Dr. Moose, if you have any comments on that, or?
Well, we talked about diagnostics, but the key thing is actually getting those applied where we need them. We have relatively poor surveillance. We don't look at most of the material coming in. We actually have a group at the BRI, the National Agricultural Biosecurity Center, who's doing some pathway analysis to look at routes by which pathogens may get into the country. But if we don't have the surveillance out there, then we're already sort of behind the curve.
I would only add that in addition to the animals, there's also plant diseases that can have a serious impact. We've had those happen in the past, not in recent history, but we know worldwide there's for example, a fungus that's rust that's had a big problem with wheat, a big impact on wheat production. Luckily, it's not been in the United States. The same goes for soybean. South America deals with a disease that luckily we don't have here, but we don't have it here because in part there's a surveillance system in place.
Oh, thank you, thank you. And I now yield to Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to start by talking about innovation hubs and incubators. It's something that I've spent a lot of time on here in this committee, not necessarily on the side with agriculture, but something that I know that we all know can be very helpful. So I wanted to ask Dr. Moose, I know in your written testimony you described the importance of agriculture innovation districts such as University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign's Illinois Research Park. Can you expand on the approach of the research park to supporting early stage businesses? What the key strategies that you use, how the federal government may be able to help more on that?
Sure. So at the University of Illinois, we do have a research park, and what its function is to take these great ideas from the campus and provide assistance in both a physical infrastructure and support for business development. They also serve to connect those early startup businesses with the business venture community. Doesn't have to be necessarily just venture capital, but we'll call it the investment community. And so those connections then help transition. It's called the valley of death often, where there'll be an idea, has a great potential, but then reaching that commercial application. And so the research park at Illinois has a number of ways it does that. I actually have personal experience with that. My wife's company was gestated, if you will, or nurtured in the Enterprise Works at the research park. They now are based in Texas, but they're one of the leading sorghum seed genetics companies. There's another one also called Eyesight that has a very new technology on how to type both animal and plant genetics. And that technology is really changed how we do that kind of work. And that was started in a lab actually down the hall from me. The research park helped transition them into a business, and now they're a subdivision within Sony Corporation. They're brought into that fold. And there are many examples of this all throughout the country of usually universities being the nucleus, but not necessarily, where, again, ideas are nurtured and cross through that I call it de-risking, where there's a huge risk. There's often talk about balance between research and development and industry and university work. And the way I like to describe that is there's an R&D, research and development, and companies are really good at the D. They have a big D and a little r. Universities are a big R and little d. And then things like the research park would be the ampersand, the in-between that helps make those links succeed.
Is there anything that the federal government could do better to help this process, help anything like what University of Illinois is doing and others?
I believe so. I think there are a number of federal agencies that recognize this technology transfer aspect. For example, the NSF now has what's called I-Corps, where the idea is that young entrepreneurs who have a good research idea, they actually can be supported for a period of time to investigate the business prospects. And they can do this in a way where they're not jeopardizing their career, in a sense, by taking time off, if you will, from the academic track. So that's one example. The USDA also has started those things. And then just the base of research, the federal support, enables those good ideas to happen. And also the facilities that may be there. I know, for example, the research park at Illinois makes use of the resources that are out on our campus because of federal and state support. So possibly just identifying where those can happen more fruitfully would be an important role of the federal government.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the commercial there for I-Corps. As many of my colleagues in the committee know, I'm the one who for many years has been talking up I-Corps, and I know University of Illinois has done a great job in terms of the number of teams they've had go through I-Corps, so it's good to hear how successful that has been. Thank you. I yield back.
I now recognize Dr. Abraham for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall, and thanks for spearheading this hearing. In my opinion, this will be one of the more important hearings that we in science, space, and technology hear in the entire year. Dr. Gerstein, I read your book, Bioterror in the 21st Century, and I really think it should be required reading for every member of Congress if we're responsible for legislating and appropriating money for bioterror. It's eye-opening, and as you allude to, the mass casualty count could be horrific. It would pale anything we've ever seen before. The field of genetic engineering, genetic modification, whatever you want to call it, sometimes gets beat up pretty bad in the press, but if my medical history serves me right, I think this goes back to maybe 30 or 40 years ago when the pseudorabies vaccine with the recombinant DNA was actually come on the scene. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that Hep B vaccines, interferon that we use for cancer, all these wonderful things in technology and medicine that not only save lives but feed our world are due to research and technology. Dr. Wagstrom, you said that you know, we'll need 70% of food production increase by 2050, which means you know, we're looking at 200 bushel acre soybeans, 300 bushel acre corn, which is not attainable now. But if we are expected as America to feed the world, as we heretofore have always done, then we've got to get there. We have in this committee, and it's certainly gone national and worldwide now, we've heard about the CRISPR-Cas9, the genetic engineering technology. I know, Dr. Gerstein, you've written extensively on the horrors of CRISPR in a bioterrorist's hands. And we know the wonderful things it can do with single and now multiple gene mutations as far as curing children with leukemias, curing possible children with sickle cell, those types of deal. So I guess my question, and all of you are eminently qualified to weigh in on this, where do we go from here? We need to move forward. We need to move forward very quickly. And You know, what's the next step in your opinion? And Dr. Gerstein, I'll start with you and just go down the line.
Well, thank you for that, and thanks for the plug for the book.
It's a great book.
Thank you. So, I'm going to come at this from a Department of Homeland Security perspective and say that what I worry about is either accidental use of something or deliberate use of something that results in a catastrophe, some sort of biological pathogen. And so I'm going to kind of stick to those. When I talk about areas like CRISPR as a technology, I don't talk about it as being a danger, but it could be a danger if the technology is misused. And so the key for us is to understand that in the realm of biotechnology, much of the area has become very de-skilled. You know, if you talk to people from the old weapons program that we had back in the 50s and 60s, they talked about people at the bench with good hands. And today, many of those technologies don't require good hands, and you can do fine in preparing pathogens that could be very useful as biological weapons. Or you could make manipulations to genomes that could actually be dangerous. And so I worry about monitoring the different areas where the technology is being used and understanding what a potential, an individual with, say, a nefarious intent could be doing with that. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the Director of National Intelligence in 2016 had identified the gene editing as a worldwide global threat, and that caused a great deal of fervor. But I think what he was signaling was that biotechnology has gotten to the point where it really does reside, in many cases, not just in labs, but in our communities as well.
I'll just make a comment on CRISPR-Cas9. I was on the National Academy Committee reviewing that technology. I suppose it was the speed of development which shocked me. By the time we held our first meeting, I was getting emails for $120 you could buy these kits suitable for high school students to do this. It was just astounding.
Yeah, thank you also for this question. I view the genome editing field, of which CRISPR-Cas is the sort of the main technology. It will revolutionize how we improve crops, because crop improvement through biotechnology, I will call it tinkering. It's like playing with Lincoln Logs, whereas the CRISPR-Cas, we will be able to basically take a genome and it'll be like a word processor, edit, change a letter here or there, and do that in a designed way. So the speed and precision at which we'll be able to do that is wonderful. I use the example of our 120-year experiment. We actually, in my lab right now, are using CRISPR-Cas to see if we can accelerate that to a 5-year time frame. We're trying to make some of those same changes that breeding took 120 years to accumulate. Can we do this in 5? So the speed and precision will be phenomenal. That said, and it's been alluded to in the earlier answers, that also democratizes, if you will, the ability to practice this technology. And so that is maybe a real role for the federal government in how do we connect the technology with society, with the end users, and make that so that the recognition of its potential and the responsibility to use it is that society understands that and is engaged in that process. I yield.
Thank you for the question. Obviously, technology affects all areas of agricultural production, especially in pig production. We look at it as a way to help us maximize animal health and animal welfare and help us produce that 70% more food. For us, obviously, PRRS is a immense issue. It's a pathogen that causes a lot of secondary bacterial infections, probably one of the reasons we use some of the antibiotics we do. So as we look at developing a PRRS-resistant pig, we think we'll not only be able to have healthier pigs but use less antibiotics. We also see technology as a potential to help us develop alternatives to the current antibiotics we use that may have less antibiotic-resistant consequences throughout the food chain. I'm a liaison to the Presidential Advisory Committee, our Council on Combating Antimicrobial Resistant Bacteria. And we've actually, one of our recommendations in our last report is that we put together an innovation institute within the USDA that would help people who are researching alternatives to antimicrobials and other areas try to go through a uncertain regulatory process, because these are uncertain where they belong in the regulatory chain, and get those commercialized. So we look at not only at technology as improving pig breeding, but also improving our tools to raise our animals.
Thank you, Dr. Marks, for the extra time.
I now recognize Mr. Byer for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall, very much. My favorite line in history is that America was born on a farm in Virginia. And it's really important that you all are here, and I really want to thank Chairman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski for putting this on. It's especially important because this administration has repeatedly undermined science, particularly in agencies where science should be the key component. Just this week, Secretary Pruitt issued a directive to prevent scientists at the EPA from serving on the agency's scientific advisory board if they've had even one EPA grant. And last month, Kathleen Hartnett-White was nominated to chair the administration's Council on Environmental Quality, despite the fact that she denies overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change and has said on the record, carbon emissions are harmless and should not be regulated. And unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is no exception. Sam Clovis, who was the administration's pick to be the chief scientist, is not a scientist of any kind, much less an agricultural scientist. And we just learned this morning that he's withdrawn his application, his nomination for that. So the American people, Republican, Democratic, and everything else, deserve a higher standard of experience and accomplishment from the top scientific leaders in our government. We're very pleased to have top scientific leaders with us here this morning. Dr. Moose, I'm fascinated with your background as a geneticist, and I'm much impressed by the work of the Land Institute in Salinas, Kansas, who have been arguing that all of nature's ecosystems are perennial polycultures, yet agriculture is largely annual monoculture, which basically short-term, high-yield perspective rather than the long-term. Yet 85% of human population's calories come from annual crops. There are perennials, olive trees, grapes, alfalfa, things like that, fruit trees. But their work is trying to figure out how do we move agriculture from annuals to perennials. First, by the domestication of wild perennials, or by the perennialization of existing annuals. So as a maize breeding and plant geneticist, what's your perspective on the work of the Land Institute and this notion of moving to perennial polyculture to avoid soil erosion, all the bad things that happen when you have to turn the soil every year?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Byer. I am aware of the Land Institute. I think they have a very, it's a good approach that they're taking. There are clear environmental benefits, sustainability improvements that can be achieved with perennials. I believe part of the reason that much of our agricultural systems are an annual base, first, they are more productive on an annual basis. So you will get higher yields from an annual crop than a perennial crop, because the perennial crop is actually investing some of that photosynthesis in below the soil, which is obviously a good thing too. But that's one reason. The second one, though, is also this risk on the farm. If I have a perennial, and so I know a little bit about this because I study miscanthus also, which is a perennial grass that's been touted as a possible bioenergy crop, a dedicated bioenergy crop. And it's an amazing plant. There's a lot to learn from it. But one risk that comes with that is it takes 3 years to establish and get to productivity. The stand may last 10, 15 years, but we only have one variety of that kind of plant for bioenergy. So if a disease was to come in, it might wipe out that crop, and we would not have many options in terms of replacing it. So annuals offer a flexibility which reduces risk. And I guess what I would advocate in terms of the best systems are those that combine the benefits of annuals with the benefits of perennials. And so research in that area is going on. I believe it would be good to increase that effort.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Higgs, you said and wrote, and I quote, "A concern was expressed this is in your, the Blue Ribbon Study Panel, that the President's fiscal year 2018 budget request would eliminate all agriculture and animal-specific research by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate. I just love if you could please emphasize for all of us that this is a matter of national security and shouldn't be partisan at all.
No, you're absolutely correct. And the beauty of this panel is that it is bipartisan because the needs of this country go beyond politics in terms of food and agriculture. We all eat. And having the funding to do that research is absolutely critical. I alluded to our training that we've got, that Homeland Security seems not to have funding to sustain that training after 2018 at the moment. And we hear about the levels of funding that is required to do the research and the training, but that is not being translated into those funds actually being appropriated to support that.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Lucas for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I turn to Dr. Wagstrom for a specific question, I think it's worth noting the wondrous system that we have in the United States. I mean, the Morrow Act of 1862, a couple of you are from those institutions. For the first time in the history of the world, with President Lincoln's signature on that act, we made it possible for someone who did not come from wealth or social status to go to college, to have an opportunity in agriculture or mechanics in the sciences to have a college education. A most amazing accomplishment. And the technology, the training that's come from that. A lot of times some of my idealistic friends here in Congress say, why should we spend public dollars to do anything? Let the private industry do it all. But you produce the scientists who fuel both higher education, research, and the private industry, correct? You're the pipeline that produces the brilliant people who go on to drive that. So that is important, that coalition, that combination, those public resources in producing our next generation scientists. We talk about the animal and health and plant issues, USDA, and sometimes, again, we on the Ag Committee, and I share both that committee assignment and this one, are criticized for the people that we have around the world. But we literally have agents in foreign countries examining plants and animals before they come to the United States. We have people in foreign countries, because agriculture is a free-flowing trade, we have people looking at disease issues there before they can be certified to bring their product into the country. So the investments we make, which are sometimes not so exciting in the eyes of the appropriators and some of our other colleagues, are very necessary. The biggest USDA research facility outside the United States is, Montpellier, France? Been there for a century, looking at things that come into the country beforehand. Now, a little more of a particular focus, Dr. Wagstrom. We've talked earlier about foot and mouth, or as my grandfather called it, hoof and mouth, that most amazing, viciously aggressive virus that we've kept out of the country for 88 years, which does still exist in other continents and places around the world. Visit with me for a moment, if you would, a little more in detail, about the Homeland Security Presidential Directive number 9 from 2004 about establishing a national policy to defend our agriculture and our food systems, and in particular, the concept of the National Veterinarian Stockpile of Vaccines.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. We have a very small North American bank, very small. It wouldn't vaccinate all the pigs and cattle around Guyman, Oklahoma. It's that small. What we need is a vaccine bank that will protect us against all 23 strains of foot and mouth disease that are circulating around the world.
And foot and mouth is an example of one of the things we need to be prepared to defend ourselves.
Correct.
One of.
So we not only need a vaccine bank with at least 500 million doses of those 23 strains, we also need a diagnostic laboratory network that has got surge capacity to be able to diagnose not only infected animals, but we have to be able to diagnose that animals are not infected and are safe to move to slaughter or to move to other facilities. We need to have foreign animal disease diagnosticians on the ground and trained to be able to diagnose those animals. Would love to have a pen-side test but the consequences of having a wrong diagnosis on a potential economic devastation, if we say this animal's infected with foot and mouth disease and it's not, would be devastating. So having a 100% accurate test on a pen site test is very difficult. So we need, in addition to that as a preliminary screen, we need our diagnostic labs to be able to communicate with our state veterinarians, not only in their state, but also the states surrounding them where animals may move. We need to have seamless information that state veterinarians can look at from the farm through the diagnostic lab into the federal system of data collection so that they can make decisions on if an animal's safe to move, if a quarantine zone needs to be connected. Our system of data collection and transfer from private farms, diagnostic labs, state veterinarians, and federal veterinarians is broken. The U.S. or the National Pork Board is investing almost $1 million with the DHS Center in Texas A&M to try to help put together systems to visualize data that will help us out in an outbreak. That's privately funded. We also need public funding to fix those data systems.
Tolerate me for just a moment, Mr. Chairman. But because agriculture, we produce almost everything everywhere in the country in some quantity. We're not just talking about one central vaccine stockpile. This has to be regionally placed for whatever particular disease we're trying to protect ourselves from to be available instantaneously. And I assume my other friends over here would note that viruses change subtly, constantly in the wild, so the stockpile has to be adjusted to reflect what's virulent and available out there. It's not a sexy topic, Mr. Chairman, but it would be of critical nature. Would my friends on the panel agree, briefly? I guess they all agree.
We all agree. One thought, just to put it in perspective, there are 1 million pigs a day that are on wheels, moving in a truck somewhere across this country, between about 500,000 cattle on wheels every day. So we don't have the likelihood of having a small outbreak on one farm in a remote area of the country. It's going to be a nationwide outbreak.
I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let the records show that Mr. Lucas and the chairman of this committee hearing thinks that biochemistry is sexy, so I'm all in. Okay, next we recognize Ms. Bonamici for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel. The district I represent out in the great state of Oregon has quite a bit of agriculture, mostly specialty crops. And this hearing is about the importance of agricultural research. Sometimes we have to take a step up and talk about the importance of agriculture. I think a lot of people in this country are still very detached from the source of their food. I think efforts like Farm to Table help with that so that people in urban areas understand that farms are important and agriculture is important for their food. I wanted to ask you, recent articles have discussed a sort of alarming decline in insect populations and also pollinators. This obviously affects agriculture. Are any of you looking at this? And if so, what are you finding? Dr. Moose, looks like you want to say something.
My experience with pollinators is growing up on the farm, we had bees. We raised bees. We raised honey. So I know about the issue that you speak. It's one where science has yet to quite figure out exactly what the cause of the decline is. There are a number of possibilities, and it's probably a combination of factors. That said, in the last few years, there's been a rebound, if you will, and we also don't understand how that has happened either, other than, I think, as spoke to earlier about the cows and pigs on wheels, bees are on wheels as well. Right, and right. Some of that practice may have contributed to the colony collapse, et cetera. Again, not definitive, but there have been changes in that to some extent because of the concerns around that. And maybe it's just correlation, but the fact that there's been reduction in the movement and then less of a issue with the pollinators may be connected.
Thank you. Climate change affects food security. How does that shape your research agenda? How are you looking at with increasing temperatures, increase in severity of weather events? Dr. Moose again?
Yeah. So clearly, if you're a farmer, you're paying attention to climate, both daily and seasonally. And so I think where the opportunity lies is that with the new technologies, it was mentioned earlier about NASA and their satellites, that technology and others like it that weren't even from agriculture necessarily have a big impact on our ability to monitor in a level unprecedented previously, where all farms can become a research entity, if you wish. And so being able to track the variation in climate, to track the performance and the productivity on farms, including the different systems. We have many different kinds of production systems. And sometimes you will hear this system is better than that system. We had a question about perennial and annual.
Right, right.
The ability now to monitor those allows us to actually gather data to really say, here are the benefits to that system, both economically in the short term, environmentally in the long term. And this is an area, it's only starting to begin now, but there's a tremendous opportunity with our, we'll call it the big data revolution, that every combine is instrumented with a GPS and is tracking, and many others of this area. I know in our own department, we've recently hired a faculty member specifically to look into this question, because we want to make sure, again, connecting farmers to the science to society, that everyone who would be a partner in this is a partner.
Terrific. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about the workforce issue. I serve on the Education and Workforce Committee, and out in my state, we have Oregon State University, our land-grant university, which has extension services in every one of our 36 counties. They run a great 4-H youth development program. Of course, we have our Future Farmers of America program. But I know, again, sticking with Dr. Moose for now, you talked about you and your wife growing up on your family farms. How do we encourage the next generation to go into agriculture, even if they don't have that family history that you had? And I'll ask you quickly, but then I'll ask the other panelists as well. How do we make sure we have a workforce to address these issues?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. In the University of Illinois, most of our students come from Chicagoland. So we really do have this urban population. And I guess the way to convince them that this type of research is to make it exciting, and this is what I try to do on a daily basis. But I think when you see the advances in science, you know, a lot of students might think, you know, the doctor or a medicine is where the action is. That when I was, you know, younger, certainly that was the case. I think that agriculture research has that connection that it could be the next big thing. And that is the kind of message that we try to convey to students.
I appreciate that. We will certainly need that workforce. Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I now recognize myself for questions as well. I'd like to, without objection, submit the Blue Ribbon Study Panel for the record, which several of our witnesses have referenced, and salute Senator Tom Daschle and his great work on this project as well. It's been a joy to get to work with him. I'll start my first question with Mr. Higgs, that you discussed in the process of the Biosecurity Research Institute, where you work, has taken to ensure a smooth transition for NBAF. As you know, NBAF has the full support of the surrounding community, as well as the support of Kansas State President General Richard Myers, who's the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He brings a very unique perspective to this and the value of NBAF when it comes to national security. Can you discuss how quickly, specifically, how quickly can NBAF start their critical research once it becomes operational?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. So NBAF will become fully operational probably in 2022, 2023. And it will become operational with the dependency on an appropriate workforce. It will take approximately 350 or 400 people to work at NBAF. And part of our mission at K-State is to help develop that workforce. We are in constant conversation with Homeland Security, with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and so forth. We have to align the training with the needs of NBAF towards 2023. And obviously there will be sequential employment of people at that facility, but it can't become fully operational until it has all of the staff necessary. It's DHS and USDA are already in those conversations and thinking ahead, but we obviously need a solid plan to know what type of people we need when in order to enable that.
Okay, I'll go to Dr. Gerstein next. The Blue Ribbon Panel report mentioned several strategies to ensure NBAF is fully utilized, including the private-public relationships. Earlier this year, DHS proposed the closure of the National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center located at Fort Detrick in Maryland and still remains underutilized despite being brought online 7 years ago. How can we ensure NBAF space and capabilities are fully utilized to their fullest extent?
Well, thanks for that question. Let me start at the beginning and say I think it's critically important that we not only fund the development of these facilities, but we think about the long-term viability. In the case of NBAC, I think we're losing a critical capability for bioforensics and for threat awareness that could put our country at risk. Now, turning specifically to NBAF, I like the idea of developing a strategy. That is a public-private partnership, and I would just compliment Kansas for the tremendous support that they had given when I was in the department. Just recognize that they had put forward approximately 25% of the cost to put that facility in, to build it. And so I think that's really a tremendous commitment. But we have to continue that commitment into the life cycle. And we have to ensure that, we bring along industry, the biopharmaceutical industry as well, the pork producers and the livestock cattlemen's associations. These are all very important that they are part of working together to develop solutions for this industry.
Right. Dr. Gerstein, are you pretty familiar with the Fusion Center as well? Are you allowed to talk how integral that could be with this process as well? It's quite an amazing facility. I got to visit recently.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Look, anytime that you bring information and you fuse different capabilities, you bring different stakeholders to the table is extraordinarily important. And in this particular area, $1 trillion, over 5% of the U.S. economy, when we can bring that kind of throw weight into the dialogue, it's going to be beneficial.
I'll finish up with Dr. Higgs. The BRI research also encompasses plant diseases with a focus on diseases like the fungus wheat blast. Wheat accounts for 20% of all calories consumed globally, making ag research a matter of food security. What kind of impact would wheat blast have on our ability to produce and export wheat? And what does BRI and K-State do to combat this deadly plant disease and others? And again, so proud of what the Wheat Institute is doing there as well.
Well, to answer the question briefly, it would devastate our wheat production. This is a pathogen from South America that can cause 100% crop losses. We've been conducting research in the BRI since 2009, safety and security, to study wheat blast and look at wheat varieties that are resistant to that. We've done research for the Australian government, for example, who won't allow that pathogen in the country. We've now seen wheat blast for the first time get into, for example, India, and it's devastating their crops. So that research is critical, run by colleagues in the College of Agriculture.
Okay, thank you everyone for answering my questions. I'll now recognize Mr. LaHood for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing today on agricultural research. And I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and for your valuable testimony. The district that I represent in central and west central Illinois has two distinctions related to agriculture. First, it's the 8th largest in the country in terms of corn and soybean production. And also, our district produces 96% of the pumpkins produced in the entire world in our district, and we're awful proud of both those. I like to tell people we got some of the most fertile farmland in the entire world in central and west central Illinois. People are also surprised to learn that in the state of Illinois, the #1 industry is agriculture. It's not any industry in Chicago or other places, it's agriculture, and we're awful proud of that in Illinois. In my time in office, I've put together an ag advisory committee that I meet with on a quarterly basis, and we talk about issues related to agriculture. and I'm amazed at the technology and the modernization of agriculture in all different sectors, whether it's drought-resistant seeds or nutrients that are put on our farm fields or the technology that goes into our tractors and equipment. It continues to amaze me what goes on, sometimes in a quiet way, in agriculture. And obviously, all of that work and the research that has been done has resulted in yields that continue to get stronger and stronger. Now, we got to do some work on prices, but obviously the work that's gone on has helped with our yields and really bountiful harvest that we've had. Before my questions, I want to highlight a unique agriculture research facility located in Peoria, Illinois, that I represent, and that's the National Center for Agriculture Utilization Research in Peoria, also known as the Peoria Ag Lab. The Ag Lab is run as part of the Agriculture Research Service, ARS, which has been a vital agency within the Department of Agriculture. For over a half century, this agency has done work to improve the lives of countless Americans and includes research on corn, wheat, and soybeans, as well as the distinction of developing the mass production of penicillin in the 1940s by Nobel Prize-winning scientists at the Peoria Ag Lab. Currently, the Peoria Ag Lab is designated to lead technology transfer for the USDA and focuses on bioenergy, renewable resources, and research for safe and healthy foods. To list all the examples of the impactful research done at the Ag Lab would take more than my allotted time, but I would like to talk about a few and highlight the valuable research that goes on there. First, ARS scientists in Peoria developed the first American Petroleum Institute certified bio-based motor oil from a seed crop, providing for growth in the agriculture and manufacturing sectors of the economy. Second, toxins produced by fungi during grain production and storage cause billions of dollars in annual losses to the U.S. economy and have had significantly negative impact on farmers and rural communities. The toxin detection technologies developed by ARS in Peoria were transferred to the private sector via licensing agreements with more than 30 companies, and their widespread use has helped to ensure the safety of the food supply and helped promote job growth in the biotechnology area. Third, new biodegradable products that are non-toxic and inexpensive to produce have been prepared from renewable materials using a process that can easily be scaled up by small or large businesses in any location. These products developed by ARS in Peoria can be used to control a wide variety of pests and pathogens, and combined with their low production cost will make this discovery a valuable new tool to help farmers and improve yield and promote economic development. Building off that discussion on agriculture research, Dr. Moose, I wanted to ask you, how can federal support of agriculture research, which our Peoria Ag Lab relies on federal research, ensure that America is prepared to lead in emerging science to continue to benefit our farmers and the U.S. economy?
Yes, so the Peoria Lab's a great example of this. The research that goes on there, the technology transfer, the impact that it has on the farm or through society. And so I would say, I guess, more examples like that would be beneficial. And the mechanisms, there are a variety of ways to do it. The USDA ARS runs that facility. There are others like it that are partnerships with either university or industry groups. But I think another aspect that could be sort of going forward and enhancing this is just convening at the table, having a voice, opportunity for industry, government, and society, or the end users, we'll call them, to sitting down at that table. And those things happen. Just in our own, recently, the people from the Peoria Lab are partners in our new Bioenergy Center that's actually a Department of Energy funded project with the University of Illinois and partners all over the country. And so through that center, we will be having this conversation, and specifically around renewable energy from biomass and renewable products. And so the group at Peoria Lab that are partners, they're a critical piece of that translation from we have plants that are valuable, on the farm, they have unique properties. How can they be processed in added value? And the Peoria lab is well positioned for that because industry, it might be too risky for them to do that type of work right now. But if we can transition that into a less risky and commercially viable option, then that would, the benefits will come.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you, Dr. Moose.
I now recognize Mr. Holtgren for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you so much for being here. This is very important discussion, and want to just say thank you for your time and your expertise. Also, have to recognize this is the second day in a row that we've had someone representing one of our great universities from Illinois. So I want to keep the streak going. Looking forward to tomorrow. Not sure who our witness will be then, but we're so proud of the University of Illinois and all of our great universities. So thank you. As my colleagues have said, agriculture is so important, and certainly in Illinois, agriculture drives exports. I had the great opportunity last year to be in Taiwan, meet with the president of Taiwan, and also foreign and agricultural ministers there, just to discuss how important and mutual importance of agriculture exports, and specifically from Illinois. I also serve as co-chairman of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and see that agricultural and food security is an ever-present force that compounds and exacerbates the basic lack of legal and human rights in conflict regions around the world. So we have to continue to recognize what we can do to make sure that food is available to every single person. Dr. Moose, I wonder if I could address my first question to you. Can you talk a little bit about how federal support for agricultural research can encourage stronger connections between farmers, scientists, and society, and how specifically Illinois is helping to build those connections?
Yeah, so as I alluded to in the testimony that I gave and then in my written testimony, I think the federal government has this role of bringing the community together, the community of scientists, the interaction with society, and then because agriculture is so important to many districts around the country, it is why it's a national issue. Every region of the country has their own climate, their own agricultural systems that operate there, yet we can learn from all of them. What a corn farmer does in Illinois, he may learn from the farmer elsewhere in the country. So that's one. Also, it was alluded to earlier, building the pipeline, where through education, you're not only educating the knowledge, there's the networking, the interaction of people that I know certainly in my career at North Carolina State, it was the early days of biotechnology research, and it was recognized a workforce needed to be developed. And North Carolina State was one of the first to do that. And now my peers that I went through that program with are leaders in the industry, they're leaders in government, they're leaders in academia. We need to have that next generation also. And I think the unique aspect of that program and others like we have at Illinois, for example, our Illinois Plant Breeding Center, industry supports the graduate training. They don't expect a research outcome. All they expect is maybe we'll have some good employees, to hire down the road. And so I think that educational piece is really important. And it was integral to Lincoln's vision. He considered the education foremost to drive the research.
I agree. Let me open this up to everyone. Coming from Illinois, I see our national laboratories as vital to our research ecosystem, building the large research facilities and unique one-off machines that no one institution or federal agency has the ability to manage. So again, these laboratories are so important to bring people together. The Advanced Photon Source at Argonne has nearly 2,000 users in the biological and life sciences. I toured Lawrence Berkeley this year and saw the great benefits of the Joint Genome Institute to multiple areas of research. Facilities like the Molecular Science Lab at PNNL also come to mind. Do you think the USDA is properly leveraging these facilities and other investments in our labs, and how can we better facilitate a more collaborative approach between different agencies so that we're doing the best science and not duplicating efforts and facilities? And I'd open up to anybody.
Well, I wouldn't mind starting just to talk a little bit about Plum Island and the work that was done there. I was in charge of Plum Island. It was part of the Science and Technology Directorate when I was acting under and then deputy undersecretary. So worked with them very closely. And I always felt like Plum Island was really very much of a joint facility. I had Department of Homeland Security people, and I had people from USDA, Department of Agriculture, and every time I'd go up there, I couldn't keep straight who was from which organization. And they were literally working on the bench side by side. One of the outputs of this collaboration was the first ever, what we call a DIVA vaccine for foot and mouth disease. And so that's a great representation of where there is good collaboration. I felt the same with other agencies. For example, EPA and Department of Ag and Health and Human Services as well as Homeland Security. We all collaborated on difficult questions about how would one handle a foot and mouth disease event. For example, think about the large amount of just waste that would be generated if you had to depopulate a number of livestock across several different farms. You know, we were thinking about numbers in excess of 50,000 animals at a time that would, you know, you'd have to do something with all that waste. So, I mean, we work very closely to try to collaborate. And there's a lot of, believe it or not, even on the depopulation question, there's a lot of research and development that goes into answering how clean is clean enough and how do you dispose of what could be very dangerous pathogenic material.
Thank you. 5 minutes, now 6 minutes goes by way too fast. So we'll follow up because I think this is an important issue of, again, how we can be continuing to build collaboration. Thank you all. I yield back.
I do want to add my thanks to all the witnesses for coming today. It was an excellent education for me. Thanks for your testimony, and the members for their questions and participation. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned.